So today I'm doing a different kind of video. Um, so normally at this point I say, "Hi, welcome to my channel and welcome to the land of enchantment and my name's Melly Bloom." But today I'm going to say, "Hi, my name is Melissa. Um, and I have a story to tell you that's very personal and it's extraordinary story, so I'd like to share it with others." So it all began with an Ancestry DNA test. In December of 2016, my husband bought an Ancestry test, like a DNA test for me for Christmas. And I had always been told that I was part Scottish and part German with a little bit of Swedish. And so I was really curious as to find out what my my nationalities were, just out of curiosity. I mean, I'm American, but anyway, the test showed up in January of 2017, and it was fairly close to the beginning of the month when I got the test. And so I was so excited. So right away, I went ahead and spit in the vial, followed the instructions exactly, and mailed it out. And then I get an email that says that it might take a while because of the Christmas rush, because they like lower the price, so to accommodate people buying tests for Christmas. So, sometime in late February, I got my results. And it was probably about 8 o'clock at night. And I told my husband, I said, "Oh my God, I finally got my Christmas present like 2 months later. I got my DNA test and I get to find out, if everything I've ever been told is true about my ancestry." So I open up the link that they send me to see what it says, and lo and behold, there was really nothing surprising as far as like my hereditary or ancestral roots. I indeed was 52% Scottish and British, as I was told. And then I also knew that I was at least part German, and I was 35% German. And then I had 6% Irish mixed in there too, but that was no surprise neither. And then I had like 7% of various little small percentages of like Italian and Spain and, nothing big. So to me, I was like, well, all this did was confirm what I had been told about my family my whole life. And I knew that we had some Swedish in there, but it didn't show up in the test. And I have since found out that sometimes it won't show up in the test. It just depends on how much DNA you get from your mother or from your father. So I contacted my brother and said, "Hey, I don't have any Native American in me," which I have been told there might be some, and everybody's told that, let's be honest. And my brother said that his test also said that he had no Native American. So that we had both been lied to from my father's side of the family that there was Native American. And he said, you can go on and look at your DNA matches. This is not a thing that I knew I could do. I thought I was just testing to see like what my ancestry was. I didn't know that it like matched up your relatives that have also taken the test. So like that was really cool. So I went and I looked at the relatives who have taken the test that matched to me. And my first match, of course, was my brother. And then my second match was a girl that I didn't know. And she was listed as, I believe it said A. Ingle. And I was like, I have no idea who this person is, and she was listed as like my first cousin. And so I was like, okay, that's strange, but I didn't really think that much into it. And I started looking through like all my various matches, and no last names were looking familiar except for the ones on my mother's side, which were like Cash and Whiteman and such. And those names were of no surprise to me because I knew my parentage. Um, anyway, I thought I did. Okay, so I looked at my brother, and he was listed as a first cousin, and I thought that was really strange. And so I texted my brother, and I was like, "Why are you and me listed as first cousins? It says close relative, but it says first cousin." And he said, "Oh, that's just the way Ancestry operates because the number of centimorgans between relatives can be similar. Like you can have the same amount of centimorgans shared with an aunt as you would a grandparent. So it doesn't differentiate. It just says cousins." He said the only time it differentiates is with a parent. And then it will say parent. And then he just dropped it. So I had noticed that his wife, Jennifer, had posted her ancestry results, and then it showed her and her sister, which I knew was her twin, but not identical twin, and it listed them as siblings. So I found it strange that my brother said it lists everybody as cousins, with the exception of your parents, but she and her sister were listed as siblings. So I said to my brother that one of us probably doesn't have the same father. And he told me I was being ridiculous, and not everything is set in stone, and maybe we don't share enough for it to right off the bat list us as siblings, and he was in denial. So, the next thing that I did was I contacted Ancestry.com, and I told them that it lists my full brother as a sibling, as a first cousin, and why. And of course they were really sweet about the news that they were giving me, and they said that due to the amount of centimorgans shared, that there was a 99% chance that my brother was not my full-blood sibling. So, this is when I discovered that who I thought was my father was not my father. So the first thing that I did after figuring out that my dad wasn't my dad, because I knew he was my brother's dad because they looked just alike. So, in the way that my brother looked like who I thought was my father when he was young. So I had no doubt in my head that Mark was my brother Mark's father. So that meant that Mark was not my father. I will give a little tiny bit of backstory here, and I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me or blah, 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 blah. But anyway, my dad was not the greatest father growing up. He was an absent father. He didn't pay child support. He didn't bother to visit us that often. He spent most of my adolescent years in prison, and that's really all I want to say about him, because this story doesn't involve him, with the exception of that he wasn't my father. And I had been told growing up by my stepmother, I'll call her R. My stepmother R had told me that my father was not my real father, but I also knew that she was really jealous of me and my brother. because we were children that were around before she was with my father. So I kind of blew it off and didn't think that much about it. I will disclose that I found my birth certificate when I was about 14 years old, my original birth certificate. And on the birth certificate it said unknown father. And so I confronted my mother at the time about it and questioned her as to why my birth certificate said unknown father. And her explanation for this was that her and my father were not married at the time, and that they had broken up briefly after I was born, and that's why my birth name was her maiden name and not his name when I was born. And I knew that because in kindergarten I signed my my homework with my mother's maiden name and not with who I thought was my father's last name. Okay, so that's as much digressing as I'm going to do on that particular subject, because like I said, his part in this story is very small, at least in my story. So the next day I contacted my uncle John, and I asked him if he knew who my father was, and he said Mark. And I said, no, I took an ancestry test and it doesn't look like he's my father. And then he explained that he was in the military at the time and not home much, and at some point my mother had run away. So he was always led to believe that Mark was my father. And I don't mean to look scatterbrained, but my mother was 15 years old when she had me, and the story I had always been told my whole life was that she was at a party and she met this wonderful guy and she had sex for the first time and she got pregnant. And that was supposed to be Mark. Okay, so that's the backstory. So my Uncle John said he was in the military and that he didn't know other than Mark. So then I contacted my Aunt Candy, which is my mother's sister, and I asked her, and she said Mark was all she knew. So again, I hit a dead end. Let me add to this story that my mother passed away in 2008 and has never told me that Mark wasn't my father. So, and my grandparents have also long since been gone. So I had limited resources on who to ask about my mother's past. So my Uncle John suggested that I get a hold of my mother's best friend from that time period, and her name was, I'll just say P. I contacted P, and I asked her if she knew who my father was. And she said it was a long time ago, because I am 42 years old, and this happened 43 years ago. And that she'd have to think about it, and she would contact me. And I asked her if it was a guy named Mark S. And she said she didn't know who that person was. And that made her assume that he was not my father, because she hung out with my mom the whole time my mom was pregnant and after I was born. So a few days later, P contacted me and said that a man named Albert H. was who she was told was my father. And so this was news to me. I'd never heard this name in my whole life. So I contacted my uncle and I asked him if he knew who Albert H. was. And he said the name didn't sound familiar. So he gave me another name. And the other name that he had given me was TL. I don't want to use people's names, that really aren't part of the story. So I contacted TL, and he was moving from, I think it was like Missouri, I don't remember, to Florida at the time. But he was more than willing to do the test, and he did look like me, So there was hope that TL was possibly the person. So TL was P's boyfriend. So I thought, what would be like the greatest lie ever to not tell me who my father is, especially if it was my mother's best friend's boyfriend, you know? You don't want to tell. Nobody. So TL was looking like a big candidate. But in the meantime, I contacted Albert H. And Albert H. knew about me. Said he always knew he had a daughter out there by my mother, Dawn. And that he was so happy because he had health problems and was so glad that I found him and yada yada. And so in the beginning of this, I'm like, so you knew about me, and I lived in the same town as you for so many years, and you never once contacted me, you know? I found it really sketchy. I'm like, wow, I traded one shitty dad for another, you know? So, he was elated, and I saw pictures of his children, and not one of his children looked like me. His daughter was on the hefty side, and so is he. So maybe that was the only resemblance, but otherwise I saw no resemblance between any of us. And so I asked for a DNA test. So, of course, him believing that I am his daughter was mad because I asked for a DNA test. He said that I didn't think he was good enough to be my dad, and that's why he was demanding a test, and yada yada. It became such a huge dramatic thing. My kitty cat's coming to visit me. So finally he agreed to taking a DNA test, and so I sent him a DNA test. I had one on hand because I had bought one for my husband. So it became a big drama thing. Anyway, I sent the test, and he received it, he took it, and it got sent in. In the meantime, I had been talking to TL, and TL also agreed to taking a test, though he had sworn up and down he had never had sex with my mother. And I told him it was 43 years ago, you know, who knows what you remember, and maybe it happened one night when you guys were partying. And he agreed. He's a very nice guy. He agreed to take a test right away. So both those tests were sent out at similar times. I think that TL's got there first, and that Albert H's, he kind of delayed taking the test. Like, he got it and then he didn't take it for like 3 weeks. So TL's test came back and he wasn't my father. But he was very nice and said, you know, I told you I didn't have sex with her, but at least this eases your mind, and it marks off one more person. Not to make my mom sound like a hoochie, because he hadn't had sex with her anyway. And really, I was just searching because I didn't know. So, because at 15, you know, in 1975, who's a frickin' hoochie? You know, not many people. So, my kitty. So the next test that came back was Albert's. And at this time, we were not on speaking terms because he had caused so much drama. Him and his daughter, okay, had caused so much drama over this flippin' test. And it came back, and lo and behold, I was right. The man was not my father. We weren't even distantly related. And I was so happy that I was not related to this man, because there was already just so much drama just from talking to him like 2 times in my life. So then I was at a roadblock. I had no idea who my father would be. So one of the last people that I wanted to contact about this situation was the person who I thought was my father my whole life, and his name is Mark, as I've said. And I contacted him, and he didn't contact me back, so I got a hold of his sister Kay, and his sister Kay was at the hospital with him He's not been in good health due to many bad choices in his life. So Kay said that she had known that he wasn't my father, and that she hoped that my mother would have told me before she passed away, but apparently she hadn't. So Kay put me in touch with my fake dad, and he said that a man named Gary. I knew this name. It was a familiar name with me, and it was somebody that I loved. So I hadn't saw him in many years, and he was my mother's boyfriend on and off for a very long time. And I knew he was around when I was a baby, but he has always told me that I was not his daughter, but he wanted to adopt me. And so when my fake father said that Gary was my father, I was happy but mystified as to why he would lie to me when he was my mother's boyfriend and then say you want to adopt me. Why not just tell me that you're my real father? And that is the beginning of this story. I've kind of give you a history and a background of what's going on. The fact that pretty much everybody that I could ever ask was dead. And, you know, finding out something like this at 42 years old is definitely a mind blower. And it wasn't so much that Mark wasn't my father. It was more that my mother had lied to me my whole life. And why did she do this? And so my daughter was like, why keep searching for a person that is so bad that my mom hid him from me until the day she died? And I agreed, but I also wanted to know where I came from. So please subscribe and hit the bell icon and come back for part 2. I think there's possibly going to be at least 3 parts of this video. It's a long story, and I'm just on my first page of notes, and I have about 5. So please come back, and this is something that you think only happens in movies, but let me tell you, it happens in real life. So until then, slay today.